Well, last week I put these center panel border stripes in with a stencil, and I initially marked them in with chalk. Then I kind of use that as a guide, and then when the paint is dry I can just wipe it off. So it just gives me a point of reference. Well, to connect these corners I decided I would like to use my Beugler striper, and I was digging those out and I thought, maybe I should just share some of the tools that I use in striping. You already saw that I use a Dagger brush. I think this one is either a double aught or a triple aught. And I have an assortment of other stripers and liners and scripts brushes that I thought maybe I just show you what I use and where they apply in different applications. And before I start any of this, I kind of feel like I should add a disclaimer before I do all this. And that disclaimer is, I am not an artist. When it comes to painting landscapes and flowers and animals, that is not in my realm of possibility. I'm just not wired that way. I don't have that type of artistic flair. Some people call what I do artistic, but it's different. It's not what I classify as art. So with that said, this is some of the tools that I use. These are both Beugler stripers. This one says it's the Professional. I have some overspray on it. Let's see, the Beugler striper Professional model. And then I have one here that is the Beugler striper, the Deluxe model. What the difference is, I don't really know. I've used both of these a lot. This Deluxe model I've actually used probably the most. And they are pretty much the same, for what I can tell. Well, they both have this little tube and a plunger. Plunger goes in on one end. And then you fill this tube up with your paint. And it has these different heads, and they have different widths of wheels. This is the finest one, and they get progressively wider as we go up to the top. But this wheel fits over this notch, about like so. And as you push the plunger up, there will be a little pool of paint that comes into this little cavity here. And then this wheel, as you run it down your surface, will pick up the paint from this area right here, pick up the paint and lay it down in the form of a stripe on whatever you painted on. So I've used these a bunch, and they have a number of different attachments to them that you can use as a guide up against different objects to control the depth and control your lines and all that kind of stuff. Well, these are really the cat's meow when you're looking to do long stripes. When I was striping the fellies on this manure spreader, I mentioned that I oftentimes use a Beugler striper when I'm doing the outside just underneath the tire. Well, when I put a gauge in like this, I can set it up against the tire and then just spin the wheel, and it gives a really nice consistent line. Well, I decided to use my Dagger brush. It is much more challenging, but practice is good, and so I chose to use it. There we go. So the Beugler striper works really well when you want a nice long straight line and you have some type of an edge to use as a gauge. Now I'm going to use it on connecting the corners on this manure spreader because I have edges that I can use for a gauge. I'll show you where. So since I want to connect these corners, and I have this corner brace here, this side brace, I can just bump this right up against this and use that as my gauge, and it will give me a nice straight line coming down to this. Well, the next time out I can either put a gauge in there, or I can use my finger as a gauge and bring it down and connect the outside, and then I'll just take my brush and fill in the space between the two lines. So since I have a framework on the top, that allows me to do the same on both of these sides. So I can just run that right down there and connect those. Down here becomes a little more of a challenge, so I have to put in a wood stick here to create my edge. And it's going to set in about like so. And I'll shim this into the correct position. I just stick a rag in behind here where I can push that in where it needs to be. Then take my striper and I will connect that dot, and I'll step it up and connect the top, and then take my brush and just fill it in. That will give me a continuous border on each of these panels. So that's where this Beugler striper really shines. When you have a long line and it needs to be fairly straight, and you have an edge that you can use as a guide, this Beugler striper is really ideal. On the sides of these Yellowstone coaches, inside that panel, there is a fine line that goes above and below the Yellowstone name, and these long stripes is where I use this Beugler striper, as well as that outside stripe on the fellies. I also use a Beugler striper. But they are not the answer to every style of stripe. So last week when I did the starburst on the spokes and I did the outside felly stripe, I used this style of brush, which is called a Dagger brush. These three brushes here are made by Mac, and they have a fairly long bristle brush, and one side is straight, then the other side is tapered down like the edge of a butter knife. That's where it gets the name, the Dagger. So I use it with the flat blade up, and it allows me to put the knife edge down, make contact, and because this has such a long bristle, once it makes contact, that drag tends to keep that straight, even though you might have a little bit of variation here in your hand, the bristle tends to pull straight, within limits. Well, this one I've used long enough that the markings are all gone off of it. I think this is a double aught, if I can just make that out. This is a little newer brush. This actually is a triple aught. And then this brush here is the same style of a Dagger, not quite as heavy. It has a longer handle to it, but this also is a triple aught made by Mac. It's just a little different style. But all three of these are in the category of Dagger brushes. And when I'm doing Yellowstone Park coaches, the undercarriage is full of stripes, and all the stripes on the spokes, around the hub, front axle, axle hounds, the reaches, the reach caps, all that is done with a Dagger brush, because they have to have a sweeping curve. This short handle allows you to roll it between your thumb and your first finger to make those sweeping curves, and you can go from pinpoint to wide, back down to pinpoint again, on just how you swirl this little Dagger brush in your fingers and roll it from the knife edge to a little bit wider and then back to the knife edge again. So these two Dagger brushes here come out of the handle on a pretty flat base here, as opposed to this one comes out of a thimble that is not quite round, but it isn't as broad a flat area here. So it's just a little bit different width. I could draw a little finer line with this brush. But when I get into wanting to do scripts or monograms or flowers. And then I get into this category here, which is in the category of script brushes or lining brushes. And there's different sizes and lengths of the bristles according to these. And these are all kind of in that category. This one here has a fairly long bristle. It's probably 1.5 inches to 1.75 inches. Has the short handle on it. Says this is a number 3. But this is made for not so much drawing a long line, but it's more for scripting. You're going to make contact here, and then you're going to roll that brush to get whatever style you would like. Now I have oil on these bristles, and this one is still kept in the case. When I clean these out with the paint thinner, I do take a light oil and I put oil on these bristles to keep these bristles moist. I've cleaned these all out to show you, but when I store them, I do put a light coat of oil on them, and then I put them in this little case here, and it has a little paper towel in it that can soak up any excess oil, but this is where I will store my brushes. So again, I like to add a little oil to these, and it helps keep these bristles in line, keeps a nice shape on them, and that's how I store my brushes. Again, it just keeps those bristles moist, and it kind of keeps them tamed, just like you can control the hair on your head by consistently combing it the same way. These bristles learn to keep their shape as well. So say I want to use this brush, then I'm going to clean out the oil that is in there. That'll give me a nice soft bristle again. And then when I want to go use it for, say, doing a monogram, then I can just take and roll this in whichever direction I would like. So now it would be really difficult to get back into this tube, but if I re-oil it, it's just a nice, safe way to store that brush. So out of all these scripters or liners, this one is actually called a swirly, which is really common to this style, just has a much longer handle. See, this also has a very long bristle to it. It's really nice for doing monograms, but I'll switch between this longer bristle to these two. These are actually the same brush, and they're only about 1 inch long instead of 1.5 inches. Then you keep your brush a little more vertical, and you're just rotating it in your fingers to do your letters, like on this old brome that I did a number of years ago. And these brushes I get at the local paint store. There's very few people that do hand stripes anymore, but they do keep these MAC brushes, and they keep these scripting brushes there. So these next two are similar, and they're probably my next favorite. This is about 1 inch long. This one is probably 1.25 inches long, very fine bristled. But the same thing, a shorter handle allows you to twist and roll and do this scroll work. So these last brushes here have the shortest bristles on them. They're 3/4 to 1 inch. This one is fairly short, it's probably only 1/2 inch. But these are all in this scripting liner. This one is called the liner. This one, can't read it anymore. This one is a script brush as well. This is right down here. And I use these a lot more for lettering. I'll use them in connection with a maul stick, because as I am lettering, I can use this as my gauge to do my lettering like I do on the sides of Yellowstone coaches. So I use these a lot, and then they are enough supple that I can do my curves of the letters, and then in combination with my maul stick, I can bring down the long straight lines of my letters. So these I use a lot in my lettering when I'm doing those. So the ones I probably use the least are these square brushes. This one I might use a little more often. It's not totally square, has a little more of a round end. These square brushes here, you know, they're nice when you want to put a square end to a letter, but I don't use those very often. So these next few brushes are more in the category of rounding brushes. They are more cylindrical in through the thimbles on the end, have round ends. They do work really nice for filling in the lines like I want to do on these border stripes on this spreader from different widths here. You know, these two here are probably the ones that I use the most. You can kind of tell they're pretty well worn. But I use these in lettering, again, in line with my maul stick, and they work really well that way. So these last two brushes are really the most fine detailed brushes that I have, really small tips on them. And when I'm doing detailed work, like I did a sleigh with some scrolls on it that I use my scripting brushes with, but then I had to put all these little flowers and petals in, and that's where I use these brushes for little detail work. Not real often do I use them, but when you need them, you need them. So that's kind of the brief overview of all my different brushes, where I use them, why I use them when I do, and some I use pretty regularly, some not so much. So that's kind of my approach to striping between my brushes and my two styles of Beugler stripers. You know, a lot of these maul sticks are 2-3 feet long. I have kind of become accustomed to this for doing letters. You know, I'm only doing like 3 to 4 inch long letters, so I use that pretty regularly. But that's kind of the mechanics of how I stripe. You know, I learned years ago from a sign painter that came in and did a Yellowstone coach for us when we were in our beginning phases. He gave me a lot of pointers, and this oiling the bristles was from him, and you know, you just kind of learn as you go. And one of the best pieces of advice that sign painter gave me was to practice on a piece of glass. You know, when you finish a vehicle or a car or a wagon to the degree that they should be done, the surface should be as smooth as glass. So you can practice on a piece of glass, doing a monogram, doing a scroll, doing, you know, whatever you want to do. And it's easy to practice, wipe it off, practice. And if you have a copy of whatever you're trying to duplicate, you could put that underneath your glass and try to get your muscle memory down to where you are duplicating whatever it is you want to duplicate. Wipe it off, try it again, so that when you're to that point of actually putting it on the buggy, your practice has already taken place. And you can change the pitch of this glass. If you're working on the side, you can practice vertical. If you have something that's flat, whatever angle, you can duplicate it in this piece of glass plate to practice. So that has been really helpful. At one time I had a piece of glass on a wood frame that was adjustable from vertical to flat, and I used that a lot. So a piece of glass to practice on has been really helpful to me. Anyway, that's my approach to striping and lettering. Appreciate you coming along. Thanks for watching.